Part 2. A New World. Chapter 1. And all this can be explained very simply. Inside, the fog turned out to be by no means uniform. The swirling greenish mass only covered the entrance to something like a pipe, or rather, a gigantic half-filled tunnel with rotating walls, made of clouds as green as the fog, shimmering in time with the rotation of emerald green clouds, the light from which, flooding the galleons gliding across the water surface, made they look like ghost ships. And this emerald green light did not frighten Abraham Van Weyden, but seemed to him unearthly and beautiful. And suddenly peace and quiet reigned in his soul, and it seemed that time itself had stopped, stopping here, in this tunnel, on the edge of eternity. And there were no more feelings, no thoughts, no desires, but only an emerald green, ghostly light filling everything around, from the first day of creation to the end of time. And suddenly everything disappeared at once. There was no fog, no tunnel, no emerald light, but only the ocean surface and the blue sky covered with clouds. What was that? Abraham Van Weyden looked around. Here is Sarah holding Morty's hand. Here is Isaac Stern. Here is Miguel de Torres. And next to the helmsman, at the steering column, their captain Olaf Larsen. And he himself stands on the quarterdeck of their galleon, the three-masted handsome Abraham, astern of which, lined up in the wake, are the Moses, David, and the trailing Solomon. Everyone is here. Not a single one has disappeared in this incomprehensible fog. And then the numbness passed completely. The people on deck, as if on command, suddenly moved at once, groaned, made noise, instantly turning the whole ship into a kind of oriental bazaar, where each merchant, praising his goods, seeks to outshout others. But it all lasted for a few seconds. Quiet! Not even like a scream, but rather like a roar. Isaac Stern's exclamation rolling over the deck instantly restored silence. Is everyone all right? Isaac Stern asked in a normal voice, after a short pause, clearing his throat. As it turned out, yes. No one was injured on the Abraham or on other ships of the squadron, where the request immediately went through the flag alphabet, however, as well as the galleons themselves. There was no leak in the hold, no broken yard, not even a broken rope. It was as if there was no such strange green fog with a tunnel inside, through which all four ships passed like ghosts shrouded in a green glow. And it would be easy to believe this, writing off everything as a sudden dream or delirium if something like this happened to one person. But when more than 1,000 people see the same thing... I don't know what to say, said Miguel de Torres, who, as an expert in natural sciences, was immediately asked for clarification. Some completely unknown phenomenon of nature, perhaps something similar to, as Christians call them, the lights of St. Elmo, which we saw before the storm in Kapstadt. Then the masts, the rigging, everything was glowing. And this is despite the fact that the clouds, although low, were not crawling along the ground itself, as they are now when we were in the cloud itself. So now think about how everything inside should glow. But it's true, and it looks like our most learned passenger is right once again. Abraham Van Weyden mentally agreed with Miguel de Torres, who during his long naval career repeatedly had the opportunity to observe the lights of St. Elmo, when suddenly, all of a sudden, before a thunderstorm, the masts and the yards flash with a soft hiss, and the festoons of a bluish glow crackle, and blue lights begin to flicker along the ropes of the rigging, charmingly beautiful but completely harmless phenomenon of nature. But then the compass was also, as it is now, weird, one of the sailors said quite unexpectedly. I was just at the helm when the lights of the elm lit up. The compass needle started to move from side to side, I remember exactly. You see? A brilliant confirmation of my hypothesis. Miguel de Torres literally broke into a smile. True, the tunnel inside the cloud remains unclear, but on the other hand, if we take into account their changeable shape, then Then I suggest we consider this an explanation of what happened, Isaac Stern said, as if summing up the discussion. Tell that to the squadron, Larson, so that people don't get scared. And set sail. The wind seems to be blowing again, and even so, how much time was lost because of the calm? What the hell? Abraham Van Wyden glanced at the compass on the steering column. The course is exactly on the east. But then why? He took another look at the sea astrolabe, catching the position of the sun. No, that's right. The same amount of deviations. Is the astrolabe broken? But how? The simplest tool, 2 parts. Or did he, a long-distance navigator, suddenly forget how to measure angles? Funny to say the least. Stupid. Because the situation with trying to determine latitude looked exactly like this, although there was nothing wrong with longitude. Goldfinger's marine chronometer worked, as always, clearly and flawlessly, unlike the astrolabe, which consists only of a coordinate circle and a rack with a sight, but at the same time produces such mind-blowing results that at the time it was doubtful of one's own mental health. For according to the same astrolabe, the sun is a faithful friend and assistant to any navigator. When determining the position of the ship in the daytime, it was not there. And to be precise, it was not at the point in the sky where he should have been at this time of the year and day, that is, 1:30 in the afternoon, under this latitude. Yes, of course, navigational observations are carried out as a rule at noon, when the sun, located at the upper climax, crosses the celestial meridian, which somewhat simplifies subsequent calculations. But even at other times of the day, it is not much more difficult to determine the position of the sun by its own coordinates, which, in fact, was what Abraham Van Wyden was doing, since their current location was needed to write in the ship's log about the incident with the green cloud. Or rather, he tried to study, because from the position of the sun it followed that they were currently at 40 degrees 12 minutes south latitude. And there would be nothing terrible about it if it weren't for one big but. Just an hour and a half ago, at noon, shortly before meeting the green cloud, they were under 35 degrees 10 minutes south latitude. Absurd! Because in 1 degree of the meridian there are 60 miles, and in 5 there are 300. 300 miles south in an hour and a half, with a maximum galleon speed of no more than 8 miles per hour, and a constant course to the east. It's doubly absurd! Although it is an exceptionally good start for another fascinating maritime story, which, after a couple of mugs of rum, a seasoned sea wolf begins to tell grateful listeners, somewhere in a port tavern. Well then, as a rule, by the middle of the story and a couple more mugs of rum, a kraken or other sea monster emerges from the water, and everyone gapes in surprise. But it's on the shore. You can do it there. But here, in the middle of the ocean, with only a few inches of wooden paneling separating a person from the path to eternity, Abraham Van Wyden saw everything in a slightly different, less rosy light. Since it was possible to explain the latitude values obtained by observations, either by the fact that all 4 ships, in fact, were somehow incredibly blown 300 miles south in an hour and a half, or the fact that the sun suddenly, for no reason, moved backwards across the sky, and taking into account its reverse movement. My God! Accustomed to conducting preliminary navigational calculations in his mind, Abraham Van Wyden unwittingly mentally considered the very possibility and immediately felt goosebumps the size of a fist run down his back, because everything, yes, absolutely everything fit. But then... Calm down. Don't panic, Mr. Senior Navigator, Abraham Van Wyden tried to pull himself together. Now to the cabin, and check the calculations on paper, twice. And after a quarter of an hour, that's enough to make repeated observations. And if the sun goes to the west, then they are really under the 40th parallel, although it is completely unclear how they ended up here. But if it shifts to the east, then... The next 15 minutes were the longest in Abraham Van Wyden's life. The secret hope of an error in the calculations performed in his mind disappeared like smoke as soon as he transferred the calculations to paper. And further, not even to clear his conscience, but rather, wanting to kill the rest of the time, Abraham Van Weyden checked his own calculations not 2 or 3 but 4 times. And only after that, after looking at the hourglass once again, and noting with satisfaction that the 15-minute period of time allotted by him to begin repeated observations had finally expired, he took the astrolabe and caught the position of the sun directly through the cabin porthole, and everything became clear. Señor de Torres, do you at least have an idea about the essence of what is happening? For the second time that day, there was a spontaneous gathering on the deck of the Abraham. And if the previous time the subject of discussion was, although very burning, but in fact still quite an academic topic, unusual light phenomena inside the golden cloud, now everything was much more serious, because 3 more equally incredible events were added to the mind-boggling fact of Abraham Van Weyden's discovery of the reverse movement of the sun. Firstly, the ocean became fresh, which was discovered quite by accident, and to his great surprise by one of the sailors scrubbing the deck. Secondly, in the east, where, taking into account the solstice, the east was quite recently, that is, directly ahead, the lookout spotted the Earth. Yes, not just the Earth, in the form of some previously unknown island lost in the ocean, but something truly huge, no smaller than Cuba, Madagascar, and maybe Greenland. Because the Earth discovered by the expedition, smoothly bending to the north and south, went beyond the horizon so much that as far as the eyes and the power of the telescopes could reach, and how such a huge landmass had not been discovered earlier by the teams of Dutch merchant ships regularly passing in this area of the Indian Ocean on their way to Batavia and back was completely incomprehensible. And thirdly, we can say, under the curtain. While we were drifting and fiddling with measuring the depth, which, by the way, turned out to be by no means oceanic, only some 36 feet, covering the northeastern, and now again, taking into account the solstice, the northwestern part of the horizon, quite dense clouds began to disperse, and because of the clouds, a huge moon, completely unlike the moon, looked out in a phase slightly less than the first quarter, near which 3 more, but already small moons, also in the phase from a month to half a disk, were clearly visible through an increasingly thinning veil of clouds. And if the small moons, both in size and in appearance, were comparable to an ordinary moon, then the big one surpassed the ordinary moon by a factor of 20, and on the sunlit side of the crescent, instead of the usual light and dark spots, multicolored parallel stripes were clearly distinguishable, without any optics. Exactly like on the disk of Jupiter, which a little less than a month ago could be seen by everyone on that unforgettable, beautiful, memorable night of practical astronomy on the island of Tristan da Cunha. But if then, on Tristan da Cunha, observing the sky caused nothing but delight, now everything that was happening, both in heaven and on earth, inspired completely different, directly opposite feelings, especially after Abraham Van Weyden finally seized the moment in everything. In this maelstrom of events, he nevertheless reported to Isaac Stern about the reverse movement of the sun, thereby plunging both passengers and the crews of all 4 ships, now peacefully rocking at anchors, into a deep, bordering on panic. And yet, it was still completely unclear what to do and what to do now. "I don't know, Gare. Stern, what's going on?" Miguel de Torres, standing near the mainmast, said with a nervous shrug. But I completely agree with the Rebbe that although the ways of the Lord are inscrutable, but all this does not look very similar to the coming of the mission. And even if we assume that the reverse movement of the sun is a sign indicating exactly this, then why is the water overboard fresh? Is this a sign for whom? For sailors, in case of cloudy weather? And Jupiter? About what? About what? And about the approach of Jupiter to the Earth in the days of the coming of the mission? There is not a hint in any of the sacred texts. As for the assumption, don't take me for a lunatic, but I just have a feeling that it wasn't Jupiter that approached the Earth, but we ended up on one of its moons, because that would explain everything very simply. And a 60-hour day, and the reverse movement of the sun, and Jupiter in the sky in the form of a large moon with 3 smaller moons, and even desalination of water overboard. The ocean is fresh here, or we are, in general, in a large lake, and if only our ships could fly through the sky as well as sail on the ocean. And this is not necessary. Rabbi Michael Finkel suddenly, quite unexpectedly, interrupted Miguel de Torres's monologue. Miguel de Torres, interrupted in mid-sentence, opened his mouth to object, but, obviously not finding any counter-arguments, stared questioningly at the rabbi. "Rebbe, have you found an explanation?" Isaac Stern asked the question in the sudden silence, his voice trembling with excitement. "Yes, Ger. Stern seems to have found it, but before speaking out, I suggest measuring the apparent diameter of the sun, because according to the Copernican system, Jupiter is farther from the sun, which means that the sun from it should look at a smaller angle. Am I right?" "You're right. Rebbe is right." Miguel de Torres immediately jumped up. "This will be the proof. How did I not think of that myself? Herr Van Weyden, I need an astrolabe. My God, it's really less. 25 minutes instead of 31 at this time of year." "But how, Rebbe, for God's sake, explain?" Miguel de Torres, like everyone else present, just stared at the rabbi with their eyes. "I'll explain and start, perhaps, with a story." Michael Finkel, taking a place near the mainmast, looked around the audience. All of you, of course, remember that during the Exodus from Egypt, our ancestors, pursued by the army of Pharaoh, crossed the Red Sea by land, when the Lord parted the sea waters and formed a passage. But now we also have a kind of Exodus, and to some extent too, even if not quite to the Promised Land, but in fact something close to it. After all, in Australia, we wanted to establish an independent colony in order to live as free people. And until today, everything went as usual, until we got into this strange green cloud with a tunnel inside. So you want to say, Rebbe, that the Lord transported us through this tunnel in the cloud with all the ships from Earth to the satellite of Jupiter, as if from a cannon, in one breath, Miguel de Torres literally blurted out. "And I come out like Moses," Isaac Stern gasped. "That's right, Mr. Stern. Do you doubt it?" Michael Finkel nodded. "You're the most important person in this whole case, the mastermind of everything. And the tunnel in the cloud looks very much like a passage in the parted waves of the Red Sea. And who, if not the Lord, is capable of doing such a thing? And if you ask me, why?" Michael Finkel paused, as if gathering his thoughts. "I don't know. I am not a prophet, and I have never had revelations from the Lord in my whole life. I can only assume, again remembering that the Lord closed the waters of the Red Sea, drowning the Pharaoh's soldiers who pursued our ancestors. So maybe something similar is also possible here. After all, it is far from a fact that, having learned that we Jews decided to establish a second Israel in Australia, the kings of Europe would have left us alone. Yes, of course, it would be expensive to fight with us across 2 oceans, which is what we originally hoped for. But on the other hand, it would be completely naive to think that for such a holy cause as another strangulation of our people, their Catholic and Protestant majesties would spare money. And they can't get here for any money. Let them spend the entire treasury to the last copper. Well, as soon as the time comes, and we accumulate the strength to return the Promised Land, the Lord will open the way back to earth for us again." "My God, that's right. Yes, it is. After all, everything, literally everything fits together." Abraham Van Weyden suddenly felt a huge weight lifted from his soul. The weight of misunderstanding of what was happening. The huge weight of uncertainty that had been pressing on him since the moment he discovered the reverse movement of the sun. And it turned out to be so simple. but life in another, completely unearthly world, which he had observed through a telescope a little less than a month ago in the form of a small silver star shining in the dark void of the sky. It was necessary to get used to this, to understand, to realize, to absorb, which is exactly what those standing on the deck of the Abraham were doing right now. A soft cooing, clearly audible in the sudden silence, made them look up. There was a bird sitting on the main yard that looked very much like a pigeon. "Oh, pigeon," one of the women said. "Yes, a pigeon flew in from the shore." "A good sign," Isaac Stern said in such a tone that it was immediately clear that he understood and accepted what had happened. "Yes, it's good," Michael Finkel confirmed and, after a pause, asked, "Gareth Stern, order the boat to be lowered. People on other ships need to be reassured. I have to tell you everything myself. This cannot be transmitted by the flag alphabet." "Yes, I can't tell you," Isaac Stern agreed. "But first," he turned to Captain Olaf Larsen. "Juro Larsen, order the colony's flag to be raised. We have arrived at the place." And a few minutes later, instead of the flag of the Free City of Hamburg, the flag of the Colony of Israel, a white cloth with a blue hexagonal star in the center, flew up on the main mast of the Abraham, heralding the beginning of a new era in the history of this world. Chapter 2. This will be our new home. Give up the starboard anchor. Yes, give the right anchor. The anchor is down. The anchor holds. Remove the sails. Give up the left anchor. A splash, and in a matter of moments the Abraham, firmly held by two anchors, freezes in a bend in a wide river, near the other three ships of the squadron. The most unusual sea crossing in the history of mankind, which began on planet Earth in the port of the Free City of Hamburg and ended in a huge freshwater lake of one of Jupiter's moons, has finally been completed. Yes, what was originally considered part of the freshwater ocean turned out to be a lake as wide as the sea, giving rise to an impressive river, in the bend of which the galleons anchored. And all around stretched the real promised land, as if it had descended from the canvas of a landscape painter. The right bank of the river, as far as the eye could see, was occupied by a hilly steppe overgrown with tall emerald green grass. On the left, a wall of solid forest of strange trees, straight as ship masts, somewhat similar to eucalyptus trees, rose almost to the water's edge, also stretching to the horizon. And right in the middle of the river, dividing its bed into two almost equal parts, stood the bulk of the island with high, about 100 feet, almost steep banks and a flat top like a table, making it look something like an ancient masada. "It looks a bit like the outskirts of Hamburg." "No, it's better here." "What a green grass. Is it spring here?" "It looks like we've successfully hit the season. We will have time to harvest." "And that's all for us?" The passengers and sailors huddled on the deck were animatedly exchanging impressions of what they saw, as if they had completely forgotten about the almost animal horror that tormented their souls a few hours ago. But everything has been clarified, and now they are pioneers, wanderers of a new world, which, at least so far, is completely different from hell, and even quite the opposite. So what is there to regret? About the sidelong glances of Christian neighbors, or the bonfire of the Inquisition for secret Jews? No, and no again. It's all there, on Earth, in the past. And here, it will definitely be better here. "There are no people here, Herr Stern," Marine Commander Aaron Yeager said authoritatively. "I can smell it, and the animals are not scared, a sure sign." And indeed, a herd of representatives of the local fauna grazing not far from the shore, very similar to bulls and cows of animals, numbering 200 heads, did not react at all to the anchored galleons. As they plucked the juicy green grass, they continued to pluck. "Rebbe, are they kosher?" One of the Marines suddenly asked a purely practical question, in which the sight of such an abundance of free roaming completely. Undeterred by the game, the hunting excitement began to play out. "They must be kosher," Michael Finkel said, holding a telescope up to his eyes. "They are very similar to cows and bulls, although there are some differences. But on the other hand, there are different breeds on Earth, so I think that this is not particularly significant." "Uncle Abraham, the green pig." "Where?" "Over there, right by the shore." Morty pointed to a thicket of low-growing shrubs that fit almost to the water's edge. Abraham Van Weyden fumbled with his telescope. "Oh, here she is." At the very edge of the water, almost merging in color with the grass, there really was an animal very similar to a pig, painted in emerald green and cheerfully waving its tail, looked at the anchored galleons. At least 400 pounds. Michael Finkel estimated the weight of the unusual green pig. But hardly any of our Hamburg sausage makers would covet it. It's too unusual in color. So it is not only for us, but also for Christians. It is also not kosher. Moreover, it was said in such a tone that everyone standing on the deck almost burst out laughing. "With your permission, Rebbe, with the question of kosher, as well as with hunting, I suggest we wait a little and, first of all, explore this river island." Isaac Stern, who finally stopped laughing, reminded of the urgent. "And it's too painful a place for settlement is convenient, like a fortress. You don't even need to build walls, and you can climb only from one side. It's like it's been specially prepared for us." And this feature of the relief of the river island even more resembled Masada, to the top of which, as is known, there was only one narrow, winding path, called the Snake. True, the passage was wider and represented a gorge that tore apart the steep shore, rather gently sloping down to the water itself. But it could also, if desired, be easily blocked with a wall equipped with gates, thereby making the island completely inaccessible, both for humans, if they still exist here, and for predators, which, given the presence of a huge number of herbivores, should have been found here in abundance. Although it should be a pleasure to drag logs to the top, even on a relatively gentle slope for building houses, but on the other hand, who said it would be easy? The disembarkation took place, as it should, in a solemn atmosphere and according to seniority. Isaac Stern was the first, as the inspirer, organizer, and head of the expedition, to step onto the land of another world, carrying the flag of the colony of Israel, followed by Rabbi Michael Finkel, a spiritual person, followed by Olaf Larsen, captain of the flagship of the Abraham Squadron, followed by Abraham Van Weyden, senior navigator and commander of the Marines Aaron Yeager, then Miguel de Torres, who, barely waiting for the end of the official ceremony, immediately rushed to study the coastal rocks, stating that it was. With that, the ceremonial part was over, and the first party of researchers, accompanied by a dozen armed Marines, headed up the gorge, easily reaching the vast, flat plateau, overgrown with the same emerald green grass and sparse shrubs that forms the top of the river island. What a space! Abraham Van Weyden looked around. If you establish a settlement, it's only here and nowhere else. Indeed, the view from the height of the plateau was simply magnificent. A lake as huge as the sea in the east and a wide river disappearing over the western horizon with banks covered with dense forest and steppe. And above all this, in the bottomless blue sky, the slowly floating sun and the crescent of Jupiter with 3 small moons. Well, what, here, or should we look for another place? Isaac Stern's question tore Abraham Van Weyden away from contemplating the surrounding landscape. Here! Here, of course, here! It was heard from all sides. I think so, too. Isaac Stern smiled. They don't look for good from goodness. Simon! Friedrich! Stay with the boat! The rest of you follow me! Aaron Yeager gave a short order and, taking his rifle at the ready, jumped out first onto the densely wooded bank of the Jordan. The first geographical studies, the first names. Arrival Lake, Jordan River, Zion Island. Abraham Van Weyden followed the Marines out of the boat. It takes 2 hours to survey the nearby forest area before the sun sets behind the disk of Jupiter, and a multi-hour solar eclipse begins, repeating here, unlike on Earth, once a day. So you should hurry up so as not to end up in complete darkness. God only knows what kind of animals are found in this alien forest. But so far, the forest, approaching almost to the water's edge, did not look threatening. Birds, invisible in the crowns of the trees, chirped. Insects buzzed. There was a smell of pine needles and some other strange, unfamiliar aromas brought by a light breeze from the depths of the thicket. The picture was simply idyllic, and if it hadn't been for the strange trees that looked like palm trees or eucalyptus trees, straight as ship masts, this whole forest would have been no different from an ordinary terrestrial forest growing somewhere along the riverbanks of Central Europe or North America. That is why, after standing for a while at the edge of the forest and making sure that there was no imminent danger, the group of researchers went deeper into the thicket. The forest turned out to be mixed, and soon palm eucalyptus trees growing near the shore, as Abraham Van Weyden named this type of tree by right of the discoverer, gave way to tall, slender, resin-scented pines, near which, spreading wide crowns, mighty oaks grew, dropping acorns on all the same emerald green grass. Definitely an oak. The ship's carpenter from the Abraham issued his conclusion, whose task was to check the local trees for their suitability in construction. And the appearance, and the acorns, and the structure of the wood. He picked up a fallen branch from the ground. It all fits together. Yes, indeed it fits. Abraham Van Weyden mentally agreed with the carpenter, if not for the extremely thick trunk and too spreading crown, more characteristic of an African baobab than an oak. So let it be a baobab oak. Oh, and who is this? Suddenly, a creature very similar to an earth hedgehog, only emerald green in color, poked out from under the roots of a baobab oak. It studied the people for a few seconds and then, with a snort, disappeared into the hole. We moved on, making our way between thickets of a strange, completely unknown shrub on Earth with very long leaves, rather like pine or spruce thorns, scaring away several more representatives of the local fauna, which outwardly do not differ from ordinary terrestrial hares, but again emerald green in color. Then the forest began to thin out, and a fairly large clearing with a lake in the center, on which a real menagerie is located, opened to the eyes of the researchers. On the very shore of the lake, taking mud baths, the already familiar green pigs were floundering, grunting. A little to the side, sheep were grazing on the lawn, of course, also green in color, and near them, gracefully shaking their branched horns, a small herd of deer, about a dozen heads, was grazing the grass, but already normal, as on Earth, gray-brown color. Now that's interesting. All small animals are green, unlike large ones, most likely because of the short duration of the dark time and the need to hide from daytime predators, concluded Abraham Van Weyden. After all, in this hemisphere, even if the sun is below the horizon, Jupiter in full phase should give so much light that you can't hide much, and the night looks like twilight. Ger Van Weyden, who is this? Aaron Yeager's question tore Abraham Van Weyden away from academic reflections on the causes of the patronizing coloration of small representatives of the local fauna. Where? Over there. Aaron Yeager pointed to the opposite side of the clearing, where, partially hidden by trees, at the edge of the forest stood a huge animal that Abraham Van Weyden did not notice at first. And the animal was remarkable in every way. The legs and torso of an elephant, the neck of a giraffe, and the head is a cross between the head of a horse and a camel. The coat color is black. Using its long neck, the animal slowly ate juicy green leaves from the tops of palm eucalyptus trees. I don't know, Herr Yeager. Abraham Van Weyden spread his hands, not even remembering from his rich life of travel and adventure, even mentions of the existence of such animals on Earth. Obviously some kind of local species. It is possible that a kind of giraffe and thick elephant legs are needed to maintain body weight. Most likely, Aaron Yeager agreed. "And it's a good thing he's a herbivore. Otherwise—" He looked at his rifle appraisingly. "This is only from 2 barrels, and even that may not be enough." "Commander, are we going to hunt?" one of the Marines asked. "Although the lambs are green, but maybe the Rebbe recognizes them as kosher, and they look delicious." "We will hunt, only." Aaron Yeager thought for a while. "Quiet, with a crossbow so as not to annoy this overgrown giraffe. He'll pounce again." The whistle of the lowered bowstring and the sheep closest to the hunters, as if mowed down, collapsed on the grass. The remaining ones were slightly alarmed, but almost immediately calmed down, continuing to graze grass as if nothing had happened, unlike the deer grazing nearby and the pigs resting on the shore. Both of them, it seems, catching the smell of fresh blood, became alert, turning their heads, and then hurriedly retreated to the other end of the clearing. Moreover, the pigs did this by swimming across the lake, thereby giving Abraham Van Wyden another discovery. As it turned out, in addition to color, local pigs were also distinguished from their terrestrial relatives by the presence of flippers instead of hooves, allowing them to swim, and quite briskly, thus forming a new species of amphibians, a river or lake pig. But the shot ram did not differ from the earthly ones in anything but color. In any case, on the outside and inside, this is the cook's concern, unless, of course, the Rebbe recognizes their prey as kosher. Having cut down a long, thick pole in the forest and hung the captured ram on it, we set off on an accelerated march, as time was running out, while not forgetting to look around not only out of ordinary caution, but also in the hope of another discovery. But alas, this time the forest refused to give up its secrets, and something strange was happening in the surrounding nature. Birds that chirped so loudly fell silent until recently. Insects buzzed less often. Flower buds closed. Everything seemed to freeze, surrendering to stupor and peace. The eclipse is close. Abraham Van Wyden finally understood the reason for what was happening. The darkest hour. That's how nature reacts. Everything that is active during the day is getting ready for bed, giving way to nocturnal animals. By the way, it will be necessary in the near future to take care of night hunting with the help of snares and hunting pits, so as not to take unnecessary risks. After all, nocturnal creatures in this foreign world can be extremely curious. But, as it turned out, not all nocturnal predators are ready to wait for nightfall. Some, such as a variety of local wolves, started hunting after dark. As the Marines left to guard the boat, could see from their own experience, when, shortly before the return of the research party to the shore, one after another, 6 animals very similar to terrestrial wolves came out, but only coal-black in color. At first, however, these representatives of the canine breed, who obviously came to drink, did not show aggression, but only looked curiously at the people who took aim at them. But then, emboldened, they decided to taste the strange 2-legged creatures they had seen for the first time. I had to shoot, knocking down 4. The 5th, realizing that the prey was too big for his teeth and bites very painfully, shamefully fled. So you, Herr Van Wyden, think that black is for night hunting? Isaac Stern, worried about the wolf attack and arrived at the head of additional reinforcements, looked questioningly at Abraham Van Wyden. Yes, Mr. Stern, considering that the eclipse is coming soon, and the presence of patronizing coloration among the local small animals is definitely true. And also the eyes, very unusual, like those of cats. Aaron Yeager drew attention to the large and, indeed, somewhat resembling the cat's eyes of killed predators. Our earth wolves do not have such, and these people should see in the dark, like in the daytime. And therefore, in the dark, into the forest, without extreme necessity, not afoot, summed up Isaac Stern. They will eat and not choke. Although, on the other hand, he thought for a while, if the predators here are not much different from those on Earth, then this world is not so dangerous. Everyone, load up. And to the island, people were waiting. And not only people. Abraham Van Weyden, sniffing, clearly felt the smell of fried meat, brought by a light breeze from the island. A barbecue made from young bulls shot in the morning. The main treat for the newly established holiday. The day of the founding of the colony of Israel. So you should hurry up. The rowers pulled at the oars, and the heavily loaded boats headed at full speed for the shore of Zion. The trophies and the story of the adventures in the forest aroused great interest and heated discussion, which smoothly flowed into the culmination of the holiday. Astronomical observations, which this time should have included not only observations of the starry sky, but also such a rare phenomenon on Earth as a solar eclipse, which was reported, first of all, in his introductory lecture, Miguel de Torres, who had been conjuring over some schemes and calculations since the very morning. What morning? Abraham Van Weyden suddenly caught himself thinking. The sun didn't set. We went to bed after mooring, woke up, and the day was still the same. Truly, each world has its own characteristics, and you still have to get used to them. And therefore, Miguel de Torres continued to broadcast to the audience who eagerly listened to his words. Taking into account the speed of the sun, the duration of the local day is exactly 64 hours. 16 o'clock is the day, 16 o'clock is the night, 16 o'clock is the morning, and 16 o'clock is the evening. And you and I are on the third moon of Jupiter from the planet Ganymede. Moreover, taking into account the fact that Ganymede, like the Earth's moon, is always turned to Jupiter with one side, there will in fact be 2 nights in the hemisphere in which we are now. It is dark when the sun sets behind Jupiter and the solar eclipse begins, which we expect any minute now. And it is bright when Ganymede, in its movement, finds itself between the sun and Jupiter, which illuminates our hemisphere, like the Earth's moon, at full moon, but much brighter. As for the change of seasons, there will be none at all. Ganymede's axis of rotation is perpendicular to the ecliptic, which is why summer in our area will last forever. That's all I wanted to say. The response to the last words of the chief astronomer of the colony of Israel was the exultation of the listeners. After all, it's one thing the length of the day and night, as well as where they ended up, and another is eternal summer with the ability to harvest 4 crops a year, a huge profit for daily bread, which could not leave anyone indifferent. And then the eclipse began. But not like on Earth. In any case, Abraham Van Weyden, who had seen 2 total and 1 partial solar eclipses in his short but adventurous life, had something to compare with. The sun touched the disk of Jupiter in its motion, and in a matter of minutes, everything was engulfed in a blood-red twilight. The sky, which had been shining with a bottomless blue a few moments ago, seemed to be filled with blood, and the steppe and forest, as far as the eye could see, turned black like coal. God, it's like hell! In the Christian hell! Abraham Van Weyden thought. But we are not Christians. And the bloody twilight was slowly fading, giving way to the blackness of the night. And now myriads of stars with an unusual pattern of constellations flashed in the sky. Yes, the constellations have changed, but not all of them. Some, beyond recognition, others, partially, and only the Milky Way, a huge starry river, as before, divided the sky into 2 unequal halves. Uncle Abraham, what is this? Morty's quiet whisper made Abraham Van Weyden look away from contemplating the great picture of the universe. Where? Over there, Morty, almost invisible in the darkness, pointed with his telescope at a huge black circle hanging in the sky, devoid of stars. This sun is Jupiter, the night side. He hides the stars from us, and therefore we do not see them, explained Abraham Van Weyden. I'm not talking about that, Morty persisted. There are lightning bolts from above and below. Here we go again. Morty raised the telescope to his eyes. Lightning on Jupiter? Abraham Van Weyden fumbled with his telescope. Yes, there is. Here they are. But not everywhere, but only in the upper and lower parts. And rather, not even lightning, but the glow at the poles. So this is, yes, exactly, the aurora borealis. Well, Morty? Well, big-eyed, it's a scientific discovery. Well, we'll write it down for you. Meanwhile, moving in its orbit, Jupiter's first satellite, Io, emerged from behind the planet's disk in the form of a narrow sickle, allowing itself to be examined in all details. Wow, nothing to do with our Earth's moon, stated Abraham Van Weyden, looking at Io in one of the 4 telescopes exposed, as last time on the island of Tristan da Cunha for general observation. Instead of the numerous ring mountains, light continental and dark arid seaplains typical of an Earth satellite, Io's surface was black and yellow, covered here and there with tall, smoking cones of erupting volcanoes. But Europa and Callisto, which also appeared shortly after Io, were no different from the Earth's moon, except in color. The surface of both was not yellowish, but gray, ashen. And then it was over. The darkness of the night was replaced by a rapidly dissipating red twilight, and once again there was a clear blue sky and bright sun around. The holiday, the day of the founding of the colony of Israel, was a success. Chapter 4: Repatriates. The next day, the construction of a new place began. Most of the male population of the colony of Israel, taking saws and axes, went to cut down trees, the main building material in these forest-rich places. Those who remained engaged in partial unloading of ships and the construction of an improvised lifting device, because dragging several thousand logs by hand down a steep slope is an activity exclusively for weightlifting enthusiasts or those who have nothing to do. But Abraham Van Weyden and his midshipmen got the job of surveyors. For even during the preparation for the expedition, it was decided that all settlements of the future colony of Israel should be built according to a clear, strictly defined plan, with wide, straight streets and a courtyard for one family, unlike the cities of Europe, with their narrow, crooked streets and houses of 2 or 3 floors, where due to population crowding, typhoid fever and cholera occur with frightening regularity. The work was not difficult, and the presence of a large number of assistants should have allowed, according to Abraham Van Weyden's estimates, to manage for the onset of another solar eclipse. But, as you know, if you want to make God laugh, tell him about your plans. The working day was in full swing when a strange, ever-increasing buzzing sound came from the sky. What's that? Abraham Van Weyden, distracted from the protractor, looked up and froze in disbelief. From the north, from the side of the lake, moving at an altitude of about 500 feet, the island was approaching. No, not a dense swarm of insects or even a fabulous dragon, but something completely different. An aircraft. Yes, it is an aircraft somewhat similar to Leonardo da Vinci's ornithopter, seen by Abraham Van Weyden in the drawing when visiting the University of Padua. However, unlike the creation of the great Italian genius of the Renaissance, the ornithopter had not 2 wings, but 4, located one above the other, and instead of a man hanging freely under the wing, there was an elongated cylindrical body, in the front of which there was some strange, shiny, ghostly circle, which became especially noticeable when it descended. The ornithopter, turning sharply, made a circle over the island, and the ornithopter pilot was clearly a man, which was especially clearly distinguishable through a telescope, waved to those on the ground. "Ger Van Weyden, what is it?" A question from one of the midshipmen distracted Abraham Van Weyden from watching an ornithopter circling over the island. "This is an ornithopter, gentlemen midshipmen, an aircraft created by local people who are very similar to us, without any sorcery and the machinations of dark forces." Abraham Van Weyden smiled. There was just not enough panic because of superstition. And now everyone is downstairs to meet a guest. Look, he's coming down." And indeed, having finished circling over the island, the ornithopter moved away to the south, and then, turning around, began to descend slowly, obviously intending to land on the water using two small boats fixed in the lower part of the hull as floats. Ornithopter in the marine version, Abraham Van Weyden mentally summarized, hurriedly running down the steep slope to the galleon mooring place, where a delegation of greeters had already gathered, represented mainly by women and children, since most of the men, as already mentioned above, went to logging, and now looked at everything that was happening from another the shores. But Isaac Stern, Miguel de Torres, and Rebbe Michael Finkel were there, and it was good. Especially the presence of the Rebbe, who knew a dozen languages, which increased the chances of communication to a greater extent than sign language. However, from the results of the observation, thanks to the telescope that was so timely at hand, Abraham Van Weyden had a strong feeling that there would be no special difficulties with translation, because optics, among other things, made it possible to see the inscription on the body of the ornithopter, consisting of a combination of Arabic numerals and Latin letters. Clear evidence of the similarity of languages. "And this is really good luck," Isaac Stern rejoiced. "Mutual understanding is the most important thing for us right now. Rebbe, can you handle it?" He looked questioningly at Michael Finkel. He nodded. "I can handle it, Mr. Stern. I have to handle it. Otherwise, shame on my gray head." Meanwhile, a dinghy was sent to tow the ornithopter, which had been driven down and was already being demolished downstream. And, lo and behold, the language of the newcomer turned out to be understandable not only to the rabbi, but also to the rowers, also, judging by their actions, who took part in the dialogue. But there was no limit to the surprise of those who met them when, a quarter of an hour later, a young man in his early 20s, dressed in tight-fitting clothes and a leather helmet with glasses, got out of a boat moored to the shore. And, addressing Isaac Stern in pure German, he said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Stern. Let me introduce myself." The pilot of the reconnaissance aircraft of the steamer Neptune, Yakov Stern. They left Hamburg on August 21, 1936, according to the Christian calendar. And after a short pause, switching to Hebrew, he continued, "Ger Stern, I am your descendant.